Well, welcome all. My name is Patricia de Vries. I am the head of the research group Art and Spatial Praxis. And I'm also one of the initiators of the program Climate Imaginaries at Sea. We started this program in 2022, collaborating with Laura Cole of the Academy of Theatre and Dance and with Sabine Niederer of the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And together we formed Climate Imaginaries at Sea, and this is a program that comprises of 3 distinct artistic research studios dedicated to fostering critical perspectives on sea level rise and high water. So material research into sea level rise and high water is conducted here at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, interspecies inquiry at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and Global South and Indigenous Perspectives at the Academy of Theatre and Dance. So each studio emphasizes artistic research, and each studio focuses on a different perspective on the same urgent climate issue. And we agreed that we would eschew any definitions of what artistic research is, and instead each studio emphasizes process, engagement, exchange, and the capacity to broaden ways of knowing and relating to the more than human. And through collaborative work and across disciplines, I mean, just to name a few, speculative fiction, sound art, sculpture, architectural design, and data visualization, these studios engage with our changed relation to water. And they do so by centering marginalized knowledges and challenging dominant narratives. The artists that have taken residency over the past 2 years exemplify how art can reimagine human and water interactions and human and water relations, while they also interrogate issues such as salinization, colonial extractivism, and multi-species cohabitation. So our studio, and then I mean the material research studio here at Rietveld, tries also to open the borders between art and research and between what is considered what. So it offers a loose framework of what artistic research can do, what it can be. And today you'll be treated with 2 presentations from the artist in residence here at Rietveld, whose work focuses on material research into the rise of saltwater and the rise of sweetwater. And we start with saltwater, and we start with Müge Yılmaz. She'll present her end of her residency lecture, and the launch, the inaugural edition of her booklet series, Future Guide for the Salty Forager. Some of you were lucky enough to get your hands on a copy. And then from saltwater we move to sweetwater with LOOM, Practice for Cultural Transformation, and there, being the new residents of the Material Research Studio, they will introduce their current research, Rhine River Rehearsal. But in between, there's a break, and then you can enjoy some performative Sweet and Saltwater Bites by Brackish Collective. Now, Müge was our first resident of the Climate Imaginaries at Sea, and that wasn't an easy task, because we asked her to address the research questions that we formulated in the application that we submitted to the Dutch Research Council. So we wanted her to look at those research questions, but we also wanted her to work with 2 different departments and 2 completely different studies here at Rietveld. And we also wanted her to conduct her own artistic research. And yet, and still, Müge managed to exceed all that we already asked from you, which speaks volumes of your talents and qualities. So Müge has been working with the students from textile and architectural design while she was conducting her own research into salt. And she's been researching the salinization of earth and groundwater, looking into ways of relating to this materials to the salinization of earth and groundwater for future living. But she also collaborated with scientific and agricultural partners to investigate biosaline farming and aquaculture in the context of rising sea levels. And at the same time, she worked on future speculations influenced by feminist science fiction. And together with our Laura Dubourgeot, she co-organized a student exhibition titled Salexis earlier this year. Using research, experiments, and sketches, students from textile and architectural design worked on a speculative island named Salexis. And that's not all, because part of her research also manifested into a beautiful sculptural installation that you see here of the Unimaginable exhibition, which is part of Climate Imaginaries at Sea Festival last April. That was on show at Braadwolf Projects. Further, she went on a field trip with students and didn't lose anyone. She gave an extensive series of workshops to students from textile and architectural design. She gave 2 performance lectures. She had exchanges with a climate law scientist and talking about abbreviations and differences in what kind of abbreviations are used. She contributed to zines, made an installation at the Art Route, which was part of the Warming Up Festival. And today she'll present her first edition of her booklet, Future Guide for Salty Forager. So, yeah, you can imagine we are, so honored to have had you as a resident, and we're so sad to see you, that it has come to an end. But Müge's end of her residency is also the beginning of a new one. So today you'll hear from our new residents, LOOM, represented today by Katía, Truijen, and Radna Rumping. And their artistic research, so then we move from saltwater to sweetwater, aims to explore the Rhine's evolving landscape in response to climate change. So LOOM collects stories and samples and voices from diverse communities along the river. And with this collection of samples and voices and stories, they seek to challenge conventional ideas of water management and control, but also the opposition between what is land and what is water, while at the same time documenting the river's complex and fluid nature. So they will introduce the various perspectives and interests and approaches that each of the individuals that together form the collective has. And they'll share a bit more about their method of the wetness walks, which serve as a starting point for a counter glossary that is in the making. And between these beautiful presentations, you can experience a performative salt and sweetwater bite by the Brackish Collective. Brackish Collective responds to issues that affect our relationship to water. So it resonates so well. Brackish is a collaborative and interdisciplinary project formed by Laila Bollen-Smith, who's here, Megan Hadfield and Tony Brel. And water is a point of departure for their artistic research and fieldwork. And they bring together a whole range of disciplines to establish interventions in and connections with our environment. So now, in closing, and before I give the floor to Müge, I want to thank a few people and institutions. None of this would be possible without the financial support of our funders. Climate Imaginaries at Sea is part of the Art Roots NWA project, Bit by Bit or Not at All, financed by the Dutch Research Council. And we have also been very generously supported by the Center of Expertise for Creative Innovation, COESI. So none of this would be possible without their support. And this is also only possible with Laura Dubourgeot and Maya Brouwer. Thank you so much for your amazing work in helping everything, from beginning to end. I'm really thankful, to be able to work with you. And of course, Sabine Niederer and Laura Cole. With the three of us working on this project has been an absolute joy. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to Müge.
Thank you, Patricia, so much. I was really proud to be the first pancake of this project. I remember you saying this a year ago when that was my introduction. But it was great to be the first one, I think. So I will also now elaborate what I did in the last year since the beginning of my research time, and also elaborate further on all the exhibitions that Patricia mentioned that we did in collaboration. But first, as an introduction, I think, before we jump into also the conclusions of my research, it's good to contextualize it one more time for those who were not here 1 year ago when I was presenting my research questions. My research quest was about, indeed, salt and salinization of Earth. Salinization of Earth as a consequence of the sea levels rising, and on the other hand, as a consequence of land subsidence, which is another human-created phenomena that is the lowering of the land levels that we live on due to also our construction, constant housing production, and the incredible amounts of concrete that we are accumulating on top of the earth, together with the extraction of groundwaters. So not only the sea levels are rising, but the earth is sinking as well, all due to human activities. These phenomena all of them are happening in real time, and my question was to research the role of salt itself, that seems to be actually a very small percentage in the material reality of these activities, but also I researched the connection of salt between our material bodies and the material bodies of oceans and seas. I wanted to first, I thought, to make also a small introduction of some news from the world that happened in the last year, which are really relevant, and every time this news came up, it was very important, I think, that I realized how relevant this kind of research is, and how actually not only Netherlands, but a lot of countries in the world are also, has been doing research actually, and these realities were much more harsher than what is the Netherlands is experiencing right now. So the intrusion of brackish water as a future possibility in the Netherlands is a phenomenon that is more or less being managed right now, because we do have access to clean water, and we do have different kinds of all drinking possibilities. The water quality from the tap water in the Netherlands is one of the best still. But at the moment, another country in Palestine, in Gaza actually, was really further with the desalination plants in the world, and they almost had 286 functioning high technology desalination plants in this small patch of land. Because of the complete lack of access to drinkable water, they were using seawater, and actually in a very high technology way with solar panel use. So these systems that were also supported by many European funds and a lot of humanitarian funds were quite well functioning, but most of them don't exist anymore, and there's almost no access to drinkable sweet water at the moment, and this is a consequence of the intentional aiming of civilian life and targeting civilian infrastructure. In the meantime, coming back to Netherlands, within the last 6 months, you can see this new drinkable water in the supermarkets. I don't know if you have noticed. I get ads about this on my Instagram. Yes, and I was like, I knew it. Like, this is, of course, it was going to happen. The solar-powered desalination is not that difficult, actually, and a lot of entrepreneurs in the Netherlands have noticed this as well. And this is seawater, and it is desalinated through a system called reverse osmosis. And you can almost recreate this system at home by internet, by finding YouTube videos and this kind of thing. So this is a very low threshold investment that does have a lot of potential for the future. And this kind of drinkable water is literally, it says nothing refreshes like the seawater underneath. And it actually, if you look at their website, I'm a bit being cynical, but it actually refers to a lot of scientific data. And one of them is from a report that has been published 8 months ago by the Public Health and Environment Institution, RIVM, in the Netherlands. And this report, almost a year ago, more than 8 months ago. And this report literally says by 2030, so it's almost 6 years from now, there might be a quite large drinkable water crisis in the Netherlands. And also local crises are already happening. Maybe you already see in the Netherlands, a lot of tap water was polluted recently, so there was a rush, hamstering rush to the supermarkets to buy plastic bottled water. And always also, I think one of the reasons why I'm always interested in these topics is that the fact that tap water is drinkable in the Netherlands is already an incredible luxury to me. If you go from Turkey on, it's just not a fact, and it's given for granted that we are really bathing in drinkable water every day. And the last news that I will just tell to contextualize my research, that a lot of also farmers are being involved in this research. This is a wheat field in Zeeland, which is the south of the Netherlands, and a lot of projects are being invested in separating rainwater and keep it as sweet water for recycling into irrigation, and removing salt water from the bottom of a lot of agricultural fields, because a lot of agricultural land in the Netherlands is on top of sea water, basically, because it's invested land. After these worldwide Mediterranean European updates, I want to go back to a year ago. What were my research questions in the first place? Because it's really difficult to remember. My research questions were: what is the larger cultural, historical, and speculative meaning of salt? Which salty soil plants are edible? And which crops can be used for agriculture in salty soils in the future? And most of these questions are finding answers in the booklet that I will present at the end. But indeed, I wanted to elaborate further on the activities that we did with the students, which was also one of the most beautiful parts, actually, of my research, because we, I think, did a lot of collective research and combined artistic research with artistic production. First thing we did, indeed, here we are in Texel, in the north of Netherlands, in one of the Wadden Islands, where we were visiting the Salty farm, and it is they are experimenting with various green plants, and they make separate sections where they use different levels of salinization, seawater to brackish water to sweet water, to see how this influences plant growth. And they already developed potatoes, which can grow in brackish water. They don't say it tastes salty, which is very disappointing. They taste just like normal potatoes, but double the price. So they are not really cash crops yet, but they potentially have a lot of potential. So this research trip was really going together with all the students from the textile department and the architectural design department. So we were doing this research together. And on the way, we also visited NIOS, the Netherlands Institutes Onderzoek over Zee, the Sea Research Institute, which is in Texel also. They're both aligned to each other, this farm and NIOS, and they introduced us into their research about all kinds of salty plants, etc. NIOS has another branch also in Zeeland, in the in the north and one in the south of the Netherlands. And then during the year, we did so many speculations with the students and a lot of exercises. We were meeting only once a month, actually. So in total, we had 9 days together, but we developed many ideas, both for textile possibilities, architectural possibilities, botanical speculations, and then we indeed showed everything at Never Never Land in kind of an end-of-the-year exhibition. The one was called Sixth Island, or Salaxis, elaborating on this speculative island that may appear in the shores of Amsterdam as an addition to the 5 Wadden Islands that are above the country, which are also very functional. And actually, most of the images in this presentation are from the students' work because I was really fond of their works. They did an amazing job, I think. And I learned a lot from them because each of them also adopted salt as a research topic, but then translated into an artistic project. For example, Domitil made a salty goddess because the name salt comes from the same etymological origin as the sun. So Sol and Salaxis, they're from the same origin. Yoon made a research about the connection and the corrosion between metal materials and salty waters. Maud and Alberte worked together and created this moldy, slimy textile creature, which is about the corrosion that comes with intrusions of water, sweet water, and salty water. And Andrea and Josephine created a whole underwater world, depending with new creatures and animals and monsters. Clement made this chair that was poetically hanging by the sea where there's constant floods, and Florial made a sassy weed, which was the protesting the sea levels changing, and Valeria was, these are just some of the projects. Valeria was telling about how in her own country offering bread and salt to every guest is a welcoming ritual. And Handa made an artwork for the workers, for women who work in the seas in Korea. And Greta created this also sea creature, which was kind of a living algae. And this exhibition was very beautiful. I'm really very proud of it. And each work, the exhibition was really very, very interesting. And I will write further also about each work of each student. And then we made a lot of other trips around the Amsterdam also. We visited different canals and tried to see which canals are salty, which canals are sweet, because they are actually different, even inside the city. They come from different sources. And then this image was the first image from Patricia's presentation from the exhibition that we organized at Bradwolf, The Unimaginable Clarion Calls from Rising Seas. And also this was a small artistic research curated table with artists from my network, more artists that I have worked with. For example, there's Carlos Irialba here, who 10 years ago, I remember this project from Rijksacademie when I was a resident. So we borrowed this from the archive, the collection of the Rijksacademie. This is sea salt that is extracted from kilometers beneath the Netherlands, and it has been accumulated there millions of years ago. So the ex-sea that the Netherlands was is the dried version of this sea. And Yanis Rafa works with animals. There's a large tradition and also necessity of offering salt blocks to cows and horses, because otherwise they do not get their minerals from anywhere. So these were sculptures shaped by animals. So each artist offered a different perspective, from plant perspective, geological perspective, non-human animal perspective. I was already making small plant botanical speculations that you can see in the booklet, one of the plants in the booklet. And also Travis Gertrude, for example, brought this seawater offering from rituals for protection in Curaçao. So we dived really into how belief and ritual takes place also with salt and salty water. Yes, before I introduce also the booklet, I think it is important to say what didn't work, I think mostly because I promised a lot of things in my proposal in the beginning, and the exhibitions I think worked quite well. I was really proud of each installation and also the connections we made between artistic research and such, but interviews, not so much, because it's not my talent, apparently. This is one of the best interviews I got. And you can see the answers of Emeritus Professor in Plant Physiology at University of Sussex, Tim Flowers in blue. I managed to convince him to write one sentence for each question, even though they were quite illuminating. And understandably, not everyone has time for interviews, especially questions like this. But so most of the interviews that I listed in my proposal actually did not happen. And I think because it's a confirmation that I'm really visually oriented and materialistically oriented person, so this kind of verbal interactions did not really pass through me really well. And I actually had amazing conversations with each student, the artists that were in the Brad Wolf exhibition, with the scientists that we met, but there's absolutely no methodological transcription of these each conversations, but just my writing of what I remember, which is also, I guess, good enough. But the methodological research-based interviews did not happen at all. So this is the best you get. I'm happy that he answered me at all. So that's already a win. And then I want to keep it very shortly. The booklet that each row of you has a copy of this booklet that I produced. This is the first concrete outcome of my research, and it is a future guide for a Salty Forager. But also it is speculative. Not all the plants that you see in this booklet are real. It's not that difficult to discern, especially if you read the texts. But it's also introduction to the dune world in the Netherlands. It also comes from one of the actually most important conclusions that I got during this research, that most of these plants are already actually saving us, and not only because we need to eat them. This is not happening. We do have different sources of food, and the agriculture is not that ruined by salinization. But however, these plants hold together the dunes in the Netherlands with their roots. This is, because the one on this side is actually a dune. And the dunes with all the plants that we see, and we give for granted all these plants because they're also so humble, so unassuming kind of plants. But they are really holding with their roots, because otherwise all these piles of sand would be subject to corrosion by the waves and by the strong winds that are coming from the sea. And so these plants are already holding basically the Netherlands together, the land that we live on, and it's protecting from the sea levels rising. And that's why the guide is not encouraging you to go pluck these roots at all, but it is more really an introduction to the importance of each singular plant. And because we really walk through the beaches and the sands and give for granted all these plants. So you can really go to the seaside in the Netherlands and try to individuate each plant and taste them a little bit maybe, so develop a kind of keenness, if not love or interest for each of these plants that have a function and that have a reason to exist there. And we have also Brackish Collective, which are some of these plants that are in the booklet are possible to taste today. I really encourage, so I will not tell too much about the booklet itself actually, because it's really, I really invite you to read it. I respect everyone who writes so much because it's so difficult to write. Even this tiny booklet took an enormous amount of time to write. So I really, again, being visually oriented, writing so much text is very, very difficult. But so please, if you find the time, read it and appreciate each booklet that we made here. It's mostly handmade. Hopefully I will continue both the research on this booklet and make a more comprehensive guide. And also, I also hope to continue the booklets and the publications in an edition. So in 1 year from now, I hope to actually come up with the future guide for the salty feminist. So advices from 100 years later to now, based on speculations. And this booklet is also based on the speculation of someone who lived until 2124, so exactly 100 years from now later. and it is sent back from a non-existing but speculative fictional person as an advice to us now, humans living on 2024. Lastly, Brackish Collective. We will now take a small break during which you can look at the booklet. If you have questions, you can ask. But also we will have a small tasting to refresh ourselves by Brackish Collective. And they have a recipe of sea buckthorn soda, iced honeysuckle tea, sea lettuce crisps, and samphire mayonnaise. But I will say it very shortly because they will present the table and all the things that are waiting for us from salty and sweetwater worlds themselves. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's just a little something, and I'm taking this opportunity to really warmly thank you, because it's been a real pleasure to accompany you in this research, and I think it's really beautiful to see how generous you've been with sharing all this knowledge that you've been collecting and bringing it to the students. And I feel like every time you had the opportunity to present your work, you were so eager to welcome others who are also busy with these questions and to create more conversations rather than exclusively presenting your own work, which is already really fabulous. I don't know if you've seen the exhibition that Müge is also a part of at W139. If you haven't, please go and see that as well. But yeah, these are some little presents for you, and to say thank you for this work. Oh, and yes, now we give the spot to Laila, who is waiting for you in the back for a lovely salt-resistant bite. And so Laila from Brackish has made an incredible collection of dishes, which are actually a beautiful way to transition from salt water to sweet water. So enjoy, and see you in 20 minutes? 20 minutes.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this salt and sweetwater bites and drinks. And yeah, they're good. And now we continue with LOOM, represented by Radna Rumping and Katía Truijen, who will talk about their Rhine River Rehearsals, which is more difficult to pronounce than you think.
It is.
Yeah,
you can try.
Despite the alliteration. Like. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia, for the invitation and initiating this. And also thank you, Müge, for your presentation. It's really nice. I think we're doing this together, and you're more like finalizing something, and we are more, I wouldn't say we're at the start, but we're in the middle of something. And that's where we are at the moment. And thank you, Brackish, for the great snacks. I just said to someone, wow, these were like some proper snacks, because sometimes there's like a little bite, but this was a real bite.
This was a real bite, yes. And also thank you, Lara, for
taking
organizing everything.
Care, yeah. Yeah, so we are here as LOOM, and we will talk about our research project, Rhine River Rehearsal, Reimagining a River. But we thought we will also take a little bit of time to just introduce ourselves and talk a bit about our collective and our background before we delve into the Rhine and the journey we made there. So LOOM consists of 5 people. This is us earlier.
In a gravel pit?
In a gravel pit in September. More on the gravel pit later. But yeah, we are with 5 of us. The 3 people who are not here are Mark Minkjan, Michiel van Iersel and René Boer. And Katía and I will briefly introduce ourselves and say a bit about our collective practice. Well, our collective LOOM started 2 years ago, and we have also longer practices and also more individual practices. So yeah, my name is Radna, and I never know what to call myself, but it's something between curator, writer, also advisor. I also have an artistic practice working with text and sound. And within the arts, I'm quite interested in ephemeral practices that are often sound-based or performance art-based. And I also run for a longer time with Arif Kornweitz, who is also situated at the Sandberg, an online radio platform called Ja 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 Nee Nee Nee, where we work with artists and radio and sound. And is there more to say? Well, another side of my practice that I don't mention often is that I'm also an advisor on art and public space for the city of Amsterdam. So I feel that my practice is always related to art, but also like where art is moving, and often not in a regular exhibition space, but more out in the open or in the air, maybe. So that's me.
My name is Katía. I already know some of you. I work as a researcher, curator, musician. I'm interested in sonic and spatial practices and how we rehearse other modes of coming together around these questions. And I am also one of the tutors here at the Studio for Immediate Spaces, which we will see and find out later. Yeah, and we are LOOM, which is the instrument for weaving. In Dutch, people often call us loom, which means slow, which is also fine.
But it's not always fine.
No, it's not always fine, you're right.
Sometimes it's
we
fine.
tell people if it's fine, yeah. So yeah, loom. This is a sort of description that we came up for now, but I think it will also maybe transform over the coming years. But we call ourselves a practice for cultural transformation. A practice because we do things together, we're practicing, and it's also a practice that evolves. But also, yeah, the challenges that we are facing today, we feel they need artistic imagination and also cultural transformation beyond dominant forms of thinking and doing. Oh yeah, we are a partnership, which means that if someone spends a lot of money, then yeah, we're all fucked.
Yeah, no, I think maybe we wanted to say something about ourselves because I think a lot of people who might do this like artistic research would be artists, and yeah. Maybe I think some of the things we do are definitely artistic or embedded in the arts. But if I look at the 5 of us, it's really quite interdisciplinary, and some have more a background in architecture or sociology or being more like critics also on architecture or urban planning. Yeah, so we really combine, that's why we have this weird swirl on the slide now. Yeah, quite a variety of practices that we are trying to combine, yeah. And then, well, yeah, I lost track already.
No, something that sometimes we also like to show, because we both initiate projects ourselves, like this one. So we do research and have like longer research themes that we want to engage with. We also do commissioned work, and when we work with people, we always want to share not just terms and conditions, which is something that organizations often do, but more importantly, share our values and conditions that we also like to read over with people and discuss the values that we hopefully share.
Yeah, and maybe like within the arts or within art education, I think it's also important to mention these values and conditions, but maybe we assume often we're quite on the same page with things. But for instance, when we are asked by a municipality to advise them on like an area that they want to redevelop, which is also work that we do, then they are not always, I think, used to some of the ways of working we have. So then we feel it's good to really make them more explicit in a document like this. So we don't come from scratch. So we are a collective now since 2 years. But before that, we had multiple collaborations where some of us already collaborated for a longer time. Not all 5 of us, but there were kind of overlapping projects and spaces where we worked. And one of them is the Oude Kerk, the old church, which is also the oldest building in Amsterdam, where between 2015 and 2022, we curated, or some of us, like me, Michiel, and also René, curated a program there with performances, research, discourse, bringing kind of contemporary art and contemporary issues to the oldest building of the city, even on top of it, as you can see here. These are just a few images to give you an idea of the diversity of projects there.
And this is another project where I met my co-LOOM member René Boer, where we worked for a long time on a research which started after the squatting ban, which came into effect in 2010, on how to document, represent, and eventually archive the spatial practice of the squatting movement, or at least of squatting communities. So for a few years we worked with 6 communities in the Netherlands, some of them in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, Maastricht and other places. Looking at the having a more focus on the spatial practice and the tactics of squatting, and also of legalized squats, also looking into the legacy. And that departed from my previous position when I was working as a researcher at the New Institute in Rotterdam, which is housing the State Archive for Architecture and Urban Planning, which consists of, maybe it changed by now, but it was 97.6% white male architects having their drawings there, but not so much collective or non-author-based spatial practices. 6 of the communities that we work with, we eventually made an archive with, trying to figure out forms of architectural and spatial representation, but also connecting to autonomous archives of the communities themselves. And this, these questions, this research continues also this question to how to document and represent architectures of appropriation today with the Studio for Immediate Spaces as part of the Field Discourse Seminar, which is happening this semester and the coming semester. And now we're in
a more recent project that we did as LOOM is Veranderland, which is an exhibition but also a research project at the Noord-Brabants Museum, starting from their collection of landscape paintings, but kind of using this as a starting point to look at the relationship with the surrounding land, specifically in Noord-Brabant, and also human extraction of that land. Instead of only showing these landscape paintings, the exhibition became kind of a space to also make people aware of current issues. So there was like a public program. There were various public programs and also an audio essay that Katía and I wrote that invited the visitor not only to stay inside the museum but also take a walk while listening to this essay. And we wanted to show you this image because Müge also did a performance as part of the program at Veranderland in September it was, I think, quite recently.
With beautiful hybrid beings inhabiting the garden of the museum. And this is a project that also led to our current research. In a way, we started this 2 years ago, a project called Time Travelers, which started from a call to action inspired by physicist and feminist theorist Karen Barat, who's stating that in these troubling times, we need to trouble time itself. And it invited one to rethink understandings of time and consider alternative temporalities, moving away from linear machine time or Western time. And here you see an installation that we made together with Marloes and Bikke, two scenographers, and a script by Jibbe Willems, which also resulted in an audio piece, which was narrating like voices of people and non-humans that challenge dominant beliefs in progress and growth, asking themselves how and at what speed we should move if we want to avert a climate catastrophe.
And I will quote the text from Karen Barat. In these troubling times, the urgency to trouble time, to shake it to its core, and to produce collective imaginaries that undo pervasive conceptions of temporality, that take progress as inevitable and the past as something that has passed and is no longer with us, is something so tangible, so visceral, that it can be felt in our individual and collective bodies. This urgency is both new and not new. With fascism on the rise around the globe and the threat of an accelerated nuclear arms race at hand, the 20th century and previous centuries are anything but past. The structure of temporality that timelines in their linearity smuggle into the discussion is inadequate to this moment.
And from this questioning of the linearity of time, we started to question the linearity of space and the landscape, and the linearity of rivers as cultural constructs, which led to our current research project situated around the Rhine River Delta that we are very close to now. And now for now we call it Rhine River Rehearsal or Reimagining a River. So over the last year, some of our LOOM members have been researching and organizing gatherings around the question of how to live with water, especially in the context of the Netherlands as a highly engineered and designed landscape focused on keeping the water out by creating polders, building dikes and water infrastructures. And there's this deeply rooted and ingrained narrative of water management and control, which was already mentioned earlier. This is a diagram that I saw in primary school that really showed us that the dikes are protecting us, and is, of course, a narrative that no longer holds or that maybe was always a myth. And over time, there have been and there will be more floods. This was 2014 at Station Amsterdam-Zuid, right around the corner. Or, of course, in Valencia a few weeks ago. And this is happening everywhere. But here, in this region that we call the Netherlands, on the left we find on this map the height of soil and buildings. And on the right, it's the chance of flooding that is coming from the sea, a lake, or the river. And the darker the blue, the greater chance of flooding. So in the Netherlands is situated on the muddy lands along the North Sea, which are to a large extent reclaimed from all kinds of bodies of water, while also lying below sea level. And with rising sea levels, melting glaciers, etc., the water is coming from all sides. The rivers, groundwater, as Müge already explained, increasing rainfall in the sea. And at the same time, we also experience periods of extreme drought, posing a wide range of challenges across the region. And while there is national programs like Room for the River, which tries to accommodate the overflowing of rivers instead of only building higher dikes, there is no clear path, and there are many scenarios in regards to dealing with the rising waters. So, as the climate crisis escalates further, the notion of wetness is becoming an increasingly urgent issue around the world. And in this particular area, we are moving to a situation of wetness too, once more. So we came from the wetlands, or a situation of wetlands, and we will go there once more, or maybe we're already there. And in their work, landscape architects Anuradha Mathur and Dilip Takunya talk about wetness extensively.
With rising seas, flooding cities, polluted rivers, piling wastes, and widening inequalities, we believe that wetness, instead of the land-water binary, holds the way forward. The idea of wetness aligns us to an imagination that accommodates fluidity, openness, and complexity. There is no such thing as dry land. Wetness is everywhere to some degree. It's in the seas, clouds, rains, dew, air, soils, minerals, plants, animals. The sea is very wet, the desert less so. So when we experience water on the other side of a line that allegedly separates it from land, we know it to be design that articulates a surface for habitation. Today, however, with rising seas, warming temperatures, and the increasing frequency of floods, this surface, along with the edifice of civilization and certainty built upon it, is threatened, calling into question the act of separation that brought it into being. Like so many binaries, the divide of land and water is unequal. Water is placed in a subservient position, confined by a line to water bodies, and made to serve land by supplying it, draining it, making it, generating energy for it, and today providing it with a waterfront for real estate development and consumption. Water crossing this line is held to be in violation of both its delineated body and adjoining land. In instances of flood, this violation is even considered natural, and the damage caused by it is labeled a natural disaster, forgetting that the line is a human invention. In other words, water is made to appear naturally prone to violence. It is hardly surprising that managing water has evolved into a professional, systemic, and increasingly contentious undertaking, while so much is invested in making the line a natural feature. It figures in the coast, the riverbank, and the water's edge, with little acknowledgement of the act of separation that bring these places into being. So this is written by Anuradha Mathur and Dilip da Cunha. We wanted to quote it a bit more longer because we're very informed by this idea of wetness, and we wanted to give it a bit more space. Yeah.
Yeah, so they advocate for a shift in the place of human habitation from a surface of land and water to ubiquitous wetness that is everywhere before it is made land and water somewhere. And over the last months, we've started to engage with the Rhine River Delta that we were already finding ourselves in. It's close to where we are based. The delta is in the Netherlands. As a complex and ever-changing environment that is both affected by and contributing to a rapidly changing climate. Because of the effects of climate change, we are forced to reposition ourselves towards this delta. And recent proposals for walls, floodscapes, rain gardens, and other water management techniques will likely not prepare us for the extreme circumstances that we will encounter in the coming years.
So, on the image you see sort of a map. As you maybe noticed, so where you see the stars, these are places that we visited during our Rhine River Rehearsal journey. That was 5 days in September. You can also see that we didn't follow the whole Rhine and that we often also deviated from it. So in essence, it's not only about this line, as mentioned in the previous quote, or as the Rhine by itself, because the Rhine is kind of everywhere, especially in the Netherlands, where it gets very confusing, because it's a delta where the Rhine is flooding into other rivers, for example. So we see this river more as a boundary object or something that also confronts us, maybe. During these 5 days in September, we used 5 different lenses, looking into a few specific locations and also using various research methods while engaging with communities occupying its past, present, and future banks. Of course, engaging with the water itself, also non-human inhabitants, and approaching the river's currents and stories of ongoing human hubris while looking for counter-narratives that imagine the future of the river otherwise. Along the way, we questioned our relationship with wetness and tried to come up with words, sounds, images that go beyond traditional representations of rivers, such as maps and diagrams. That's also why this is a map, but we like to turn this map around, for instance. in an attempt to capture the Rhine River Delta in its messy, unpredictable flows, not containing but facilitating its fluidity. And so at the moment we are still looking into this journey, although it was only 5 days, but there's actually a lot of material that came up, and also points of view that we maybe brought in and were maybe also challenged during this journey. And we will be working on a zine with a counter glossary in the coming months to imagine this Rhine River Delta in another way. So what we are presenting today is mostly an introduction of how and why we arrived at the Rhine, and also what our research methodologies and specific lenses have been. And also just to give you an insight into what collective research can look like or be like. So we challenge the notion of the river as a linear construct and question dichotomies between land and water, center and periphery, and urban and rural, as well as the languages that surround the river. Meanwhile, we turn to existing artistic practices and methodologies approaching the river, including ways of listening and writing.
So a bit more straightforward about the journey, following an initial itinerary that we made based on points that we wanted to visit in the landscape, where we were to experience and discuss the questions and lenses and methodologies that we brought. We traveled from Amsterdam and Rotterdam, that are part of the Rhine River Delta, to the Oipolder area near Nijmegen and the former brickworks Kleverberg, along the Maas River, where we stumbled upon the Belfort gravel pit, after seeing a huge scar in the landscape on Google Maps. And here we met sand and gravel and in production. And this place has been existing for 35 years. And here we met Joep, who has been working at this gravel pit for the past 35 years, until next year, when this wounded landscape will be so-called given back to nature. And we would like to read a bit from a conversation that we had. Walking towards the sorting machines.
The stones here, they go through a sieve machine, and then they are washed or refined. We pull the sand and gravel apart. Then we make sand types, 0.1 and 0.2 and 0.4. And then we have 3 types of gravel left, the 4 to 8, the 8 to 16, and the 16 to 32. Here you can see that there is mass in between. It is not only Rhine, this deposit, because this is lyddite, and that is actually a mass deposit.
And what is a Rhine deposit?
Quartz, agate, but you also have lyddite here and mass pebbles.
Do you find fossils here?
Well, you can sit here for 35 years and not know anything, but if you are interested in something, in 10 years, together with Leiden University, we have found more than 30,000 molars of mammals, such as a molar of a macaque, a tapir, a forest elephant, and 5 species of mole.
And also marine animals?
Yes, molars of fish species. This is a short fragment from Joep. There is more Joep in our recordings. Yeah.
And we continued our journey to the recently flooded Valkenburg, where we made a sound walk. The large Hambach-Tagebau brown coal mine, which is now this huge, again, scar in the landscape, but which will become a future Rhine basin, and I think maybe the largest inland lake of Germany, if I'm correct. On to examples of what we could call Rijnromantiek here at Schloss Drachenfels, or the Lorelei area. And finally, we ended up at Grieteroord, which is not far from the Dutch border. It's an island which emerged because of the straightening of the Rhine, and it's flooded each year during the winter, where only a few houses on terps remain above water level. And here we met Judith, an artist who is collecting stories around water and living with water there, and now she's also collecting our stories. And here you can see what is left of the old river. So this used to be the Rhine, but because the river was straightened, this old tributary, which has now become a tributary, is kind of slowly turning into a swamp. But here you see the island being flooded in wintertime.
Yeah, so that was more like an insight of the journey itself. So where did we go and what sites did we visit? But then we made this journey also with the 5 of us, and each of us brought a specific interest or lens that, yeah, we will now briefly introduce. It's kind of funny, yeah, because I also feel we're speaking for the 5 of us and 3 of us are not here, and it's also quite interesting. So everyone has prepared something for this presentation, but in quite different ways. And then Michiel suddenly came with a video and with drawings that he made. I will read along, I think. How to live in a world of ubiquitous wetness. Is it playing? Yeah. We emerged from and still live in a state of wetness. Paul Klee drew our situation as a water cycle, an infinite river with water evaporating, forming clouds, falling down, and flowing. We are part of this cycle. For most of history, people would adjust to the water, living on natural elevations and mounts while the water rose. In this fluid world, there is no stability, no clear boundaries, just a shared vulnerability and agility. Capitalism and its evil twin brother colonialism cannot cope with fluidity. They want to control, so they invented the map and rivers, culturally constructed lines imposed on fluid land. Rivers became test sites and models for human control over nature. They were dammed, straightened, contained, and tamed. But now, with water levels rising and soil subsiding, should we raise the dikes or challenge the divide between water and land? Can we learn to live inside a river? So Michiel is also someone who's already longer involved with this idea of ubiquitous wetness. This is also a drawing of him, that there was a time that parts of the Netherlands were more like underwater, then there's a kind of solid part, but looking at the future, it's very likely we should go to a more liquid situation again, something more in between. I think is the next one, This is a very different map, but I know it's also an inspiration for Michiel. It's a map of the Mississippi Delta. And here it's made in the 1940s by Harold Fisk. And it's more like a time lapse. So, yeah, I think it's a beautiful visualization also where you see the flows of the river over time, which goes completely against the straightening that we see in a lot of other maps or dealing with rivers at the moment. Then this is Griesoord, where we just talked about.
So here you can clearly see the straightening of the river on the left side, what used to make this curve.
And yeah, there's a literal living with wetness happening, as we also talked with Judith. She said that, in the winter they're really isolated, living on this farm, and they have to take boats to get food somewhere, and it's kind of a recurring thing that happens there every winter. Then another, I was doing that one as well, yeah. Another lens is by Mark Minkjan, Living with the Land or Of the Land. It's also quite specific, so I think I should read a little bit. And through his angle, he wanted to retrace and imagine how people and other species have lived and will be living on river banks and in floodplains with a specific interest in raw material extraction, biodiversity, and regenerative practices. And the focus during the journey was on the Ooipolder.
which is an area located on the left bank of the Waal part of the Rhine, so still in the Netherlands. And part of the Ooipolder there is a hamlet called Erlecom, and that used to be situated on the right bank of the river and belonged to the municipality of Ghent. But then the river was straightened for pragmatic purposes. So because of human intervention, the river moved, basically. And there was also a castle of Kleveberg, which existed since the 14th century, that kept standing in the same location, but then the river moved around it in a different way. The castle disappeared in a flood, after which the location hosted a farm before a brickworks was built in the 19th century that was discontinued in the 1970s. And the remnants of the factory are now being repurposed to become part of a regenerative estate with the aim to establish a flourishing ecosystem of humans and other species for which healthy soil is crucial. The fact that there was a brick factory is because of the presence of river clay, a result of sedimented particles of stones carried downriver from the Alps. And to produce bricks, molded rectangles of clay are fired up to 1100 degrees, generally using fossil fuels and emitting enormous amounts of carbon. To source clay for the bricks, straightforward clay pits are dug in to remove the topsoil of the riverbanks. And these quarry sites, usually situated next to a brick factory, are destructive to the ecosystems. So there are many clay pits that have been dug in the Ooipolder over the past 2 centuries, and some of them are still visible in the landscape. Maybe we can go back to the... So this is an example, because older clay pits from which the mining activities have moved away, that haven't been filled in, have turned into shallow ponds. And it's kind of strange, because if you are there now, it looks like a very idyllic landscape, actually, in these ponds. And they belong to the most biodiverse parts of the Dutch landscape. So this focus is more on that brick production clearly functions at the expense of the local soil and biodiversity, while its emissions contribute to further destruction of ecosystems. But ironically, the remaining clay pits are almost its opposite. In comparison, these are just small patches, but they are reminders that after human activity, nature can quickly flourish and heal the scars in the land. And maybe it's also interesting to keep this in mind when we see later, or you've seen an image before, of this gigantic brown coal mine, or the gravel pit there where we met Joep, because these are also scars in the landscape, but they have much larger scale than these scars coming from the brick industry and brick production.
And now I will talk on behalf of René Boer, who brought in questions of straightening and queering the landscape, specifically around the area of the Lorelei. And now you have to forgive my German pronunciation, because I know there's many German-speaking people in the room. I will try. So, die Luft ist kühl und es dunkelt, und ruhig fließt der Rhein. Der Gipfel des Berges funkelt im Abendsonnenschein. Die schönste Jungfrau sitzet dort oben wunderbar. Ihr goldenes Geschmeide blitzet. Sie kämmt ihr goldenes Haar. These are 2 of the 6 verses of Heinrich Heine's poem Die Lorelei, which René had to learn by heart in German class in 2nd grade. It's about a gorgeous maid with golden hair sitting on a mountaintop overlooking the Rhine, seducing boatmen with her wondrous melodies, distracting them from their navigational duties and leading them to an untimely death. For René's German teacher, it was probably quite an innocent attempt to share some simple German poetry with his pupils, while for students it was mostly a struggle to get all the umlauts right, more than anything else. But in hindsight, it was maybe not so innocent at all, despite the silliness of the story. And René, I'm quoting him now, looking back, for me this particular poem represents a very simple but also very clear and explicit example of the background of toxic heteronormativity and sexism, which was unescapable growing up as a queer boy in Amsterdam in the early 2000s. When the shared interest of the LOOM team in notions such as wetness and transforming landscapes brought us to the Rhine as the structuring element of a collective research project, it was this poem and the ability to still recite it in almost full which came to mind, and which became the starting point of developing his lens of looking at the Rhine River. Reading about the context in which Heine wrote his poem, he learned about the Rijnromantiek, a way of looking at the Rhine River landscape during the Romantic period from the late 18th till the 19th century. And here we are interested in, and René particularly is interested in, Rijnromantiek versus the Rheinbegradigung, so straightening. And over the course of the 19th century, there was both a romanticization of the Rhine River landscape as a tourist destination in poetry, painting, etc., and also the large-scale engineering to optimize the stream of the river for industry and transport. These two phenomena are two sides of the same coin, comparable to Orientalism, excessive, non-reality-based selfish appreciation combined with the right to control, domination, and exploitation, also the basis of 19th century colonization. These can both be seen as forms of straightening, designating the Lorelei rock as a female object of desire on the one hand, straightening of the Rhine on the other. So during the journey, we focused on the existing binary between straightening, demarcating, categorizing, optimizing, maintaining, versus queering, breaking open or making fluid. And when it comes to a river, this could be the difference between the Rhine as a specific line on the map and the ubiquitous wetness of the Rhine basin, where the water is everywhere. But herein also lies the classic danger, a question: does the fluid aspects of queering mean a kind of anything goes, we are all queer, or can queerness also be an articulation or naming or denial, refusal or destabilization? And what does this mean in the context of researching the Rhine? How far can we stretch the metaphor of queerness, fluidity, in the context of thinking about the Rhine? What are the queer leftovers, mirror images, undercommons, provocations, etc.? For example, in contrast to the Rheinbegradigung, we find the lush natural areas in the cut-off areas. And what can we find in contrast to the heterosexual symbolization of the Mittelrheintal as female exoticism and tourist overconsumption? We found a lot of hotels that were called Zur Lorelei in the area.
Yeah, I didn't know much about the Lorelei myth, but for one day I was. It seemed like there was nothing else. We stayed also close to the spot where the myth is that she was sitting on a rock there, and there is this specific rock where the Rhine makes a kind of corner, and it's now a tourist destination where buses of people come to see this sculpture that has been later made of her. So when I was thinking about what my lens would be, I had some difficulties with the Rhine. I just didn't know how to relate to it. Like, it felt a little bit far from things I'm usually occupied with, while some others, I think, in the group had a longer investment in thinking about wetness, for instance, or landscape. And it's not that I never think about landscape, but it took me a little while, like how to join or how to, what I would bring in. And then I decided not to pick a specific location, but more bring in some kind of exercises and scores we could do as a group that I see as a way of doing embodied research, which has been on my mind for a longer time. In Dutch, I like to call it belichaamde beschouwing, which is slightly different. It's difficult to translate it, so embodied research feels a little bit more general. But what I mean with that is that it's a form of research or contemplation in which there is a porosity between the researching body and the environment, or that which the researcher wishes to investigate. So in this case, dealing with the Rhine and wetness and the land and water divide. And I thought, if we want to make an attempt to make rigid categorization around water and land more fluid and less binary or less straight, then how should we, how can we position ourselves then? What is a fitting attitude or position to do that? And in embodied research, the subject-object position is not fixed. So there's actually an ongoing, what I would like to call a call and response between acting but also undergoing something or surrendering to something or admitting something. And there's a pretty known writer and theorist, Gloria Anzaldúa, who you might know. There's a small sentence she wrote in one of her books that I have often on my mind. It's very simple, but she wrote, "I am the one who writes and who is being written." So you act and you write, but she is also being written. And this back and forth, between the environment and yourself, and how to respond also to that, and be in a kind of call and response with the environment, or I think that's an interesting attitude, or to attempt to involve that also in the kind of research that we are doing. And a lot of research, including what is called artistic research, uses methods in which the researcher stays somewhat at a distance or only deploys certain senses. So we can think of desk research or reading literature, but also in field research. The emphasis is often on reading information or visually mapping or measuring an environment. And I know that from myself as well. I think especially with having always a phone with a camera with you, it's like it goes so fast that we make maybe images because it's so within reach. And I think the making of images sometimes also creates a distance. So I don't say that these other methods are wrong, but I'm more thinking like, how can we maybe include other forms that might help mapping and being in a changing environment? So how can multiple senses and sources that are maybe more subjective or imagined or subconscious also be activated in a research project like we are doing? And for this I have drawn inspiration from various artistic practices affiliated often with performance, choreography, sound art. And some of these practices I know through reading about them, and others I know because I have been actively participating myself in these practices. And from these I have distilled several exercises, and I took them with me on the Rhine River Rehearsal. So I literally had like an envelope with 8 small cards in it that all had an exercise we could do. And it wasn't completely planned, so it was more like, oh, we are here now, maybe it might be a good moment for this exercise. I wrote a few down, so you have a little bit of an idea where these things are coming from. So there are quite some from conceptual artists who were active in the 1960s, and also a lot of new practices in art, or art practices were changing when it comes to sound or making scores or choreography. I brought also a publication with me. Katía doesn't know this. It's also not a big thing, but maybe I can just pass it around. Like, I love this book from Yoko Ono called Grapefruit. And, it's like every page is a score, and some are not possible to do. Like, they are like kind of artworks for your mind. But some you can also think like, can I maybe do it? So she has here, water piece. Steal a moon on the water with a bucket. Keep stealing until no moon is seen on the water. But then there's also a line piece. Draw a line, erase a line. Line piece. Draw a line with yourself. Go on drawing until you disappear. So some of them you can actually also see as scores or instructions. And I will just pass it around because I just love this book. As an example of an inspiration. And so from these practices, some scores have been very precisely recorded or written down by respective artists, but other exercises are rather scores that I think are just circulating, like they're also circulating amongst you, I guess. So the creator or exact instruction scores cannot always be traced. And I see them as possible tools for arriving at a more embodied form of inquiry. This is a book that might be in your library. I just wanted to mention it because I thought it was an interesting reference. It's called Going Out, Walking, Listening, Sound Making. And it's an anthology that traces the long legacy of interdisciplinary experimentations when it comes to walking, listening, and sound making in the arts. And with this, I also want to mention an awareness of positionality, because when we think of the flaneurs back in the days, like this, or the idea of the dérive from the Situationists, these were often white men who would wander around in a landscape or in an urban landscape. And I think it's also important to be aware of positionality when it comes to this type of work. And I think especially in this book there are a lot of interesting art practices with, for instance, sound walks that have a more intersectional approach and a more critical approach. So it depends also, like in our case, we are 5 white bodies, people who speak Dutch. You know, when we came to the gravel pit where Joep was working, it wasn't totally forbidden to go there, but it was also not very clear, like if we could just walk there. And I think by speaking the language, or there was no problem, but it's also good to have an awareness of how bodies are read, or what it would have been if we would walk along the Rio Grande Delta instead of the Rhine Delta. And then, I think we also, is it something about the sound walk? Well, Katía, you mentioned briefly before we did a sound walk in Valkenburg, and maybe you go into that later. But the sound walk is also listening to all that emerges, and we can use a recorder. But I also like how Hildegard Westerkamp talks about the microphone ear, that our ears are also a microphone. So we can also focus them on specific parts in the soundscape. And this is something we were doing while walking silently in Valkenburg. And we were not speaking to each other, but just listening to the surrounding. Maybe a final reference that I'd like to mention is this this duo. I didn't know it was a duo, but what I'm showing here is the dance deck by Anna and Lawrence Halprin. They were a couple. I've heard of Anna Halprin because she was really someone who, someone wrote that her contribution to dance is as important as John Cage's contribution to music. So where John Cage introduced silence as music or in music, Halprin initiated non-dance, and she did that in the 40s and 1950s already. So she really challenged the binaries between who is a dancer and who's the audience. What do we consider as dance? Can we include tasks, daily life, movements into performance, things that are so common right now, but that were not common back then, and also the divide between nature and culture. Her husband was Lawrence Halprin, and he was a landscape architect, and he developed with her this dance deck that was at their house in California that was in the middle of the woods. And here for many, many years, they did workshops, movement workshops. And they also developed a method that they call the RSVP cycles, which is summarized in their 1969 book, The RSVP Cycles, Creative Processes in the Human Environment. It's this one. And I didn't read this one yet. So maybe this is also in your library, but maybe not. But I read some things online. But what I like is that they try to come up with a method of how to do collective work, coming from their backgrounds as landscape architect and choreographer, and that they could do this with different people, communities, participants. So you didn't have to be like a dancer or performer yourself, but how to make a kind of collective research method using also performance. And these, the letters RSVP stand for, the R is for resources. So it's anything that can be used in the process, including time, physical materials, other people, IDs. And the score is the instruction for the work. This can be identified by a score gradient of a very open or a closed score. Then the V is for value action. So it's a process of evaluating, but also dynamically responding to the work and doing something with it. And the P is for performance, setting the work in motion. And as you can see in their rather messy drawing on the cover of this book, this cycle doesn't always have to go from R to S to V to P. So you can also perform the score, perform resources, scoring resources, so there's no fixed order. And you can jump from any element to any other element as long as there is consensus. So during the Rhine River Rehearsal, we got a start, I think, with a number of exercises I brought, which in turn led to new information. And this is maybe the final slide in this part. And this information can then again serve as source material for a next exercise or a next cycle. And this small example is an exercise that we did at the Lorelei point where the sculpture was and the tourist arrived, where we silently walked around for a while, or not for a while, I think it was a timer was set to 10 minutes or something, and then did a 8-minute stream of consciousness writing. And I was pretty annoyed by this Lorelei. I was really a bit irritated and angry. And I think when you do this stream of consciousness writing, so you just start writing and you don't stop for 8 minutes. In my case, there's more writing arriving from the gut. So this irritation was really in my writing. While if I think I would have written in a normal way or later, it would have been a bit more sanitized, maybe, or a bit like... this is just a small example of materials that came up through these exercises. And the final lens.
This is so just a few more minutes. I brought a perspective that for now I would call elsewhere listeners. And through my interest of engaging with our environment through sounds and listening, I think a fascination I share with Radna, I had been listening to other rivers. I first deviated from the Rhine, for instance, by composer and artist Anya Lockwood, who had been following and recording the Danube River over the course of a few years, but also talked with the Hague-based sound artist Zara Malkani and listened to her recordings that she made of the Mali River in Pakistan to create a different representation than the maps that bear no traces of the indigenous communities who have lived with these ecologies for generations. But also listened to the Chendich River, swimmed and recorded by Sami artist Margrethe Patterson, other recordings. And for instance here, Anya Lockwood, while she was speaking with people about the river that she was traveling along, she would, in their native language, she would play back the recordings inside of the water. And she would always ask, what is a river and what does the river mean to you? And I think what is interesting about these and other soundscapes is that they have the possibility to hold different temporalities simultaneously. Within soundscapes, urban and rural sounds, natural or man-made sounds, land and water sounds overlap and coexist, and there is no clear demarcations. So how can we read a landscape differently, perhaps be more open to its fluidity by listening to it? And while a landscape has changed or has been controlled and exploited, the sonic landscape of these geographies have changed too. How did noises before affect human and more than human inhabitants? How will future soundscapes affect them? And how are soundscapes alternative cartographies? And at the mouth of the Rhine River, if we could speak of such a thing, lies Hoek van Holland, which is an hour cycling from where I live in Rotterdam. And when looking at old maps, my eyes were always drawn to the peninsula that used to be there, which had the illustrious name De Beer, or De Bear. It used to be a huge nature reserve and bird breeding island. And in 1985, the expansion of the Europort harbor started, which resulted into the biggest eco-site in the Netherlands, taking place until 1964. I found sound fragments of birds breeding as part of an old TV news item. And when I cycled to this end of the Rhine in September, all I found was a petting zoo that was caging birds and other animals such as sheep and donkeys, making lots of noises when I came closer. So how can we listen to the landscapes as material witnesses of the exploitation of landscapes and their communities? How can we reconstruct soundscapes of before? And what do they tell us about colonial histories, harmed ecosystems, and human and more than human entanglements? And how can we imagine what these sites will sound like in the future? Interesting references in this regard, if you want to read also more about this, is Listening to Images by Black Feminist Theorist of Visual Culture, Tina M. Kempt, especially her notion of listening to low frequencies, or Forensic Audio Analysis and Sound Research. So on the third day of our Rhine River Rehearsal, we visited this Hambach Tagebouwmijn, not to be missed on Google Maps, as a big scar 30 kilometers west from Cologne and this future Rhine basin. And here I propose to think about how we can understand and position ourselves as listeners. Wherever we are always elsewhere listeners, carrying unique sonic memories and localities with us. And while we walk and listen, we ask ourselves, where are we listening from? How are the things we hear connected to other times and territories, other processes and struggles? And we listen always with our bodies. And I think this was encouraged more because of Radna's exercises that she brought. So sounds resonate with our bodies, which in the end are water bodies. We are part of wetness, and wetness is part of us. The waters that we comprise are both local and global. We are here and now and at least 3 billion years old and already becoming something else. And while water connects us, it also separates us. And it's important to acknowledge differences in how we may listen and what we hear or do not hear, how we learn and pass on knowledge, how we are connected to what's around us, to what's above us, and what's below us. And now I would like to listen to a short audio collage, a few minutes of encounters with the Rhine River and moments of wetness, with overlapping locations and moments in time, if it plays.
Architect denk ik dat zo'n ontwerp Nee, er waren wel meer, maar dit was wel een soort van echt dikke concentratie.
Ja, ook op de allereerste bakstenen huis in Amsterdam. Dat is dan misschien die kleur.
Wat is deze vloer?
Dat is Nederland.
Oh ja. Het is echt groot, hè?
Einst lebte zu Bacharach am Rheine. Once upon a time, in Bacharach on the Rhine, there lived a lovely young woman called Lorelei. She was of exceptional beauty, and scores of men fell in love with her. Sadly,
dan maken wij zand, 01, 02 en 0-1 niet 0-2.
Oh ja.
En dan houden wij verder nog 3 grenssoorten over. Dat is een 4-8, wat je gewoon achter ziet. De 8-16 en de 16-32. Dus, en dan kun je ook zien wat, hier misschien op daar kun je het meer zien. Dat ook, hier zit ook naast tussen.
Ah. Oh ja.
Het was gewoon van alle kanten. Het was helemaal niet meer. Alles was te veel. Ja, ja.
Waar nu ongeveer?
Ja, hoe hoog wordt het dan?
So here we are in muddy territories. This image is a picture of the old Rhine after straightening the river. And it has become a ditch or even a swamp. And I imagine the future of the river landscape as a sounding swamp. And these are questions that I would like to continue to ask, such as what rhythms or cycles do we find when we listen to the landscape? What noises do we hear? What do we filter out when we listen? How to listen to images? In which ways are we always elsewhere listeners ourselves? Where are we listening from? Is recording always a form of extraction? And what if the sound listens back? Or what if the swamp listens back? And maybe, I think we're a bit over time. But one methodology that we continued with after this journey, and that we are still continuing, that some of you actually joined, is what we for now call wetness walks, and where some of these lenses can also converge. So this was a first one that took 4 days actually, from Amsterdam, from the Zeedijk to the sea, with Rietveld students of architectural design, discussing, analyzing, mapping and drawing and experiencing wetness. Or here a few weeks ago with some of you, and also some CIS alumni in Amsterdam, in collaboration with the Goethe Institute, who are also partners in the project, where we walked from the Herengracht to the Amstel, to the highest parts in the city, discussing histories and futures of water and wetness, also testing some tools. Here again at the mine with the Borderlands Residence Program, we're also partnering with us, engaging more with deep time. And this is very recently with Studio for Immediate Spaces, our wetness walk at the Northern Island in Rotterdam, which is located in the Maas River, which is buiten dijksgebied, which means that it's not protected by dikes. To deal with high waters. But interestingly, the water was very low when we were there. And there was a clearly felt urgency for community organizing. But I think people are still looking for tactics of collectively dealing with the water. One of the residents actually posed a question to the municipality whether or not in the long term it would be worth it to save the Northern Island from flooding. So that is to be continued, that question.
Thank you for staying with us on this quite extensive journey. I have no idea how much we're over time. But as you can tell, we were talking a little bit, Müge, before, that you start somewhere and then you go like this, and at some point you go like this again, and we are very much here now. We are
Nevertheless, we're still open to other lenses and methodologies.
And there's also quite a lot of other people who are also artists who do research at the Rhine that we're also in contact with, and we also like to hear, if other people have maybe other lenses or approaches. But slowly, in the coming months, we will want to work a bit with confluences and work towards a counter glossary zine. That's the plan for now. I liked also, Patricia, what you said earlier this week when we had a call. You said that we're not an orchestra. So we can also, sometimes we might play, the 5 of us might play very much in tune, but maybe sometimes not. And that we will weave these lenses together, but maybe there will be some strands that go in other directions. But I think that's something we would like to share with you in spring. So thank you for staying.
Yeah, thanks.
Maybe there are questions.